You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of WebTrends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. WebTrends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm in conversation with AJ Davis, founder and CEO of US-based Experiment Zone. As one of the team, AJ worked in Google during the conception and development of Google Optimize, so we discuss how A/B testing / CRO has advanced since then. We talk about how the market has matured, whether the balance between data-driven and visitor empathy is right, and if businesses are attracting the right customers. AJ, I noticed from your LinkedIn profile that you were a user experience researcher in Google before they launched Google Optimize. It was around 2015 when it went to beta or something like that. What was it like during those early days, and how did your own experience help drive the product forward?
Yeah, I had a fantastic opportunity to be part of the Google Optimize team as their lead researcher, user experience researcher. From the day it was in a hotel lobby where we were brainstorming ideas and user journeys and doing the full Google Sprint Week together. So it was just in that ideation, what are those core problems we're going to solve? What are some of the pain points that customers have, and all that fun discovery. And then I was part of all the research that went hand in hand for the product from that day until that product launch. So it was a really fun journey to be on, and lots of learning and hypothesis testing.
It must have been really exciting as well.
I really enjoyed it. I love innovation. I really love iteration. And so A/B testing really speaks to that, as well as building a brand new product.
So did you yourself learn anything that you took forward to your future career?
I think I basically learned that I was jealous of people who got to do optimization. So I was in my career, had been a qualitative user experience researcher. What that means is I was running a lot of user testing, interviews, usability studies, really getting to the nitty gritty of how people use products, how they move through their lives, what that intersection of technology and human looks like. And it was very fun. It was very energizing. But I had come from an economics degree and really loved like hard data and being able to make decisions at that intersection. So with the research on Google Optimize, I was interviewing people who got to look at user experiences and then have a quantitative approach to testing out their hypotheses for whether those changes would really work or not in the real world. I always felt as a user experience researcher, this lingering question of, yes, we saw it in the lab. Yes, we learned about this behavior, but does it hold up in the real world? And optimization and A/B testing really passes that bar of saying, we've learned about it, we've thought about it, we've really researched it up front, and let's validate it in the real world as well. So I ended up transitioning careers after working on the product and becoming a director of optimization.
So do you think the data is the whole truth or just part of the truth? Because I think there's two camps out there. One set of people believe it's part of it. Other people say, no, the data never lies.
I think that data can be an important part of understanding the story of what's happening. But there's lots of different data that could point you in the wrong direction. And so it's about crafting a hypothesis that's informed and then knowing which data points would confirm or deny that hypothesis. So for example, if we only looked at a single metric, we might be misled. But if we could understand in aggregate all the changes that could happen as a result of the change, then we would feel much more confident in the signals we're getting. So I believe data is really powerful, but I think it's more important to think about what data or what questions to start with before you look at the data so that you don't get misled.
That's a really great answer, because that's what I'd hoped you'd say, but other people just believe that if it's in the data, it must be true. But I know that not to be the case also. So when you were working at Google, you were very much in that ground floor with regard to what Google was doing, but there were other products out there like Optimizely, and WebTrends had something at that point as well, which is around an optimization product. Do you think that the market was ripe at that time to bring in, say, Google with their free and the lots of other vendors that have joined since? Or do you think it's still in its early infancy now?
I certainly think that the industry is growing in recognition. It's no longer this niche position somewhere in an analytics team. A lot of core business decisions are starting to look at experimentation programs to really inform higher level strategy. I do think that we are pretty early on, though, and what I look to for that is, in addition to the product maturity in the market and the variety of choices you have and the variety of features you may have, I also look to what our clients are doing and where the titles are and how experienced people are. And so you see that companies want this skill and that they need this skill, but there's not a corresponding degree program. So it's not clear who you hire, because we really are unicorns. You have to know data, you have to know user experience, you have to know development, you have to know analytics. So there's just a myriad of skills that have to come together around experimentation. And there's not something that's necessarily training people to cover all of those things. The one other thing is, my master's degree is in human factors and information design, which is a really fancy way of saying user experience research. And that degree, when I was getting it, was growing in popularity, and now it's widely recognized. So I think we're going to be similarly in a place in just a few years where everyone knows about experimentation and there'll be more standard paths to it.
But it's gained popularity, I think. There's a lot of people that are talking about it now. But outside of the top, I'd say the top 1,000 brands, those next tier and the tier below that aren't quite getting to grips with it yet. And I think there's some challenges around that. But do you think that there are enough experienced people out there to help companies beyond that top 1,000 companies?
I think the field is expanding. I do think you have to be very selective with who you work with. I think there's some trends that emerge where people end up with sort of a list of tests and you just run the same tests with all your clients, versus a more strategic approach to understanding your audience and your business needs and your goals. And so I think that's often something that surprises people when I'm first introducing them to conversion rate optimization and how they could partner with us, is how personalized an approach that we take, where it's really thoughtful and there's a ton of work that happens before we even think about a specific test. There's also a lot of expertise in how to set up the test and what metrics you need to collect. So I think that we do have a shortage of people who are really talented in this area, but there's an appreciation for it. So there's definitely a growing set of resources. And I do see smaller companies able to start hiring, even if they're outsourcing for that talent, to be able to benefit from CRO.
Yeah, I think looking at the UK, I think there's lots and lots of in the many hundreds of job roles that are being advertised for CRO type or user experience type expertise. And I still feel that there's a challenge in the marketplace that there aren't enough people to fill all those vacancies. And therefore, the agency approach, one agency working with multiple organizations, is probably still prevalent at this point. Whilst I think in the not too distant future, once the expertise gains more momentum, that we'll probably have somewhere in the region of a 50-50 split with regard to in-house versus out-house of expertise. But that's just my own feeling. What's it like in the States?
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I think that's generally true as you're able to scale things, is that you can start bringing some of the expertise in-house. I think one of the real challenges that we see in the States is, this realization that it's very hard hire to bring one person in versus an agency who already has the process. They have years and hundreds of tests under their belt for understanding what works and what people respond to. Plus, the expense of hiring developers, analysts, project managers, designers, researchers to start a CRO team is far greater than hiring an agency who already has all that skill in-house.
I'm going to take you back to when you started Experiment Zone there, back in March 2017. because the landscape must have been quite different at that point, because there was very little expertise that was around, and there was Google, who was announcing their free tier product, which must have been, I suppose, generating some hype that A/B testing, as it was really known then, was actually going to launch at some very large accelerated viewpoint. Now, I go back to something which is earlier in my career. We had the same thing with desktop publishing many, many years ago in the 80s, where everybody thought, well, desktop publishing, everybody's got to become an expert in desktop publishing. Yet it never really took off in-house. It was still the agencies that looked after that. So what was it that stimulated you to go off and do your own thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that was a hypothesis I had as a researcher at Google that has since changed, or I've learned and gathered some signal on otherwise, is the idea that, A/B testing should be for everyone. The idea of a WYSIWYG where people can drag and drop features and, make really smart test ideas and have easy to read reports. I still believe that's true, but I think that having worked with some major companies, also smaller companies who are just quickly growing and are trying to take advantage of that increase in traffic, it's a really hard puzzle to solve, to figure out what to do with it and to have that dedicated focus. So I think one of the things that motivated me to have my own agency is this intersection of research and A/B testing. Oftentimes, I've worked in both agencies that strictly do A/B testing and agencies that strictly do user experience research. They both have their own merits, but I love the intersection of the two. Mm-hmm. And I love bringing them to companies who haven't thought to put those pieces together. The reason that intersection is so important to me is because I have this experience working in the product development world where you have the opportunity to learn, iterate, and incorporate data that's both qualitative and quantitative. And I think it's really hard for marketing teams to do. So for me, it's just a really fun intersection. And I love working with teams that have maybe tested a little bit or have tried some things out, but are really looking to level it up and learn not just about what works or not for their visitors becoming customers, but also things that can apply more broadly to their business strategy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with UX and design and flow and things like that, which it can only be measured really by testing different variants. And I think that's an area where there's a hidden benefit with regard to CRO, because not only does it or can it deliver value in the increase in return on investment, but it also can help you get your site better, to make less friction, I suppose is one way of describing it, on your site, and therefore improving the overall customer experience. And that can be brought back into developing other areas of your site as well.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is what keeps me doing this, which is a different spin on what you asked, but what keeps me doing this is that I get to be wrong and I get to learn.
There's not many people that would admit to saying I get to be wrong.
But it's so much fun. If you just get it right every single time, then why are you testing? And it's really great to build up a hypothesis, measure it in a really smart way, and then learn something really amazing or learn about a really big opportunity for business and then build on it further. It can be, over the years, it's the very small changes can have these huge effects in one way or the other. And so often I see businesses just changing things kind of free form, or because someone had a good idea or because a competitor is doing it. And, I have little moments where I have to, catch myself and not tell them to stop, because we've seen in measuring all those little things that you just don't know sometimes what could happen. Oftentimes things do align with our expectations and we can still learn about customers. But in those, odd cases where something really unexpected happens, you can really have a breakthrough moment that can change how you think about the customer and how to think about the site architecture and a whole bunch of other things.
I think one of the challenges is that many companies do a test and it proves to be successful, and then they don't look at that again for another 3 to 6 months. They think they've done that, where actually I believe, and many others believe, that it's more iterative, that you do a test, you try it, then you keep revisiting that test to make sure it's still optimized for the conditions that might change over that time. Do you believe the same?
Yeah, and I think to build on that, I would say you even taking the same learning and applying it elsewhere on the site is an often missed opportunity. So if you see, reminding your customer that you have free shipping on the product page, maybe they need to be reminded elsewhere, and maybe that's an effective message to incorporate elsewhere. And so for us, we like to think about not only are you doing a test with a specific hypothesis, we also build up what we call test themes, where we identify, an underlying principle that we're trying to understand and learn about. And so instead of just kind of pulling from random ideas across the year, we focus really deeply on test themes with our clients so we can walk away and say, we've really learned this. We know we're maximizing the value on this type of theme.
Do you know when to walk away?
Great question. I think the way that we think about it is that the roadmap is iterative, just like any individual test is. And so the way that we do it is we use qualitative research to help refocus us. So it's not so much that we're walking away, it's just that we may reprioritize. And so by understanding in qualitative research, let's take a usability test. You may surface, 3 to 5 top problems that your customers are having on the site. And you will want to address those with more urgency because the customer knows it's a problem. They can articulate the problem. Mm-hmm. You see them have the problem as they're trying to achieve their goals on the site. And so it becomes more urgent to solve those issues. But certainly we do revisit those test themes again and again as we work with our clients over the years. It's just some things ebb and flow in terms of their urgency.
So looking back at March 2017, it must have been quite challenging to get your first customers on board because obviously it was very much in the infancy of regarding CRO to be adopted at that point. So how did you get your first customers? How do you get your first clients on board?
Yeah, amazingly, my first client was my previous company. So I had been a senior optimization director at a company here in Austin called Clearhead, working with some top brands across the United States. And, I decided I wanted to start my own agency. And so I talked to them and said, look, I'd love to keep working together, but I'm going to go do my own thing. Would you like to work together in this capacity? It wasn't a snap of a finger. It was certainly some great conversation about it. But I did start, day one with having a full-time client, and also, explored some other services. Did a lot of usability research with some small and medium companies here in Austin, and kind of worked through what it was that we were going to offer and how we would be in this space. So it's definitely learning by trial, and we really carry the same philosophy that it's in our name, Experiment Zone. We really believe in the power of experimentation, and so we do that for ourselves and our clients. So we're always looking for ways to, give ourselves a hypothesis and test against it and be ready to be comfortable with failure, because that's where we can learn and really find where we can add value and have a fun time in our space.
Do you believe that your clients are focused on finding the right customers, or are they generally just happy to gain customers whoever they are?
I think I'd reframe it a little differently. I think that they're eager to learn about who their visitors are and what attributes their current customers have. And if there's enough similarity, they're pretty happy with that, but they want to be able to better connect with those that exist and those that are there. I don't often see customers say, I want to go chase down a whole new vertical and a whole new customer set. I think a lot of our customers are fairly mature in understanding and having identified some personas and ideas of what their ideal customer would look like. Where I find, our ideal client to be are businesses that aren't strictly checking the list on here are the demographic traits of our customer, or some maybe more superficial attributes of customers, but they really want to understand what are their pain points on the site? What are their pain points in life? What are some of these bigger friction points so that they can better deliver a better product or a better service, so that in the long term, they've built up a stronger lifetime value of that customer, and they understand them and can maintain that relationship. So I think when it comes to optimizing a site, sure, you're looking to nudge people who might be on the fence or nudge people to the right information that they're having trouble finding. So it may be on the margins that you're making the change today, but you can build up a broader understanding of what people respond to, what your customers, what kind of stimuli your customers do respond to. And then paired with qualitative research, you can just build up a really strong understanding of what they need.
Do you think you might be in danger, or your clients might be in danger of using that kind of hackneyed phrase, Amazon recommendations, by saying, our customer looked at this, also looked at that? Do you think that's an attitude that customers are looking at now, trying to be able to, I suppose, cookie cutter a process? Or do you think it's much more personalized than that now?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act, and it's a tough one because in one way, we want cookie cutter for some UX elements. We want your navigation to be recognizable. We want it to be findable. We want your search to work as people expect search to work. So in some ways, we do want a very cookie cutter interaction so that people don't get confused by it. On the flip side, if we over index to what our competitors are doing or what industry norms are, personalization has been such a buzzword. But if done correctly, it can add value. But a lot of companies forget to measure what the impact of adding that is, whether it's good or bad, increasing trust or not. So I think what's more important is to start with the problems your customers or your visitors have, rather than just looking around the field and saying, what latest technology can we add to our site, and instead try to solve pain points they have, because that's a way to build trust and loyalty. It's a way to remove friction much sooner for that customer so that they can become repeat customers. And the answer may or may not be some sort of recommendation that everyone else has, but it should be use case dependent. And I think businesses should take that step back to say, why am I considering this solution?
So how would you advise your clients to focus on the right set of customers then? Is it just looking at the data?
Yeah, good question. So I think that we often start with a hypothesis of the customer. Very often our customers have customers, and we can talk to those customers and kind of help them understand or build that persona if they don't have it already. And then within that, there's kind of depending on what the research question is, you do need to build in a sense of who you're trying to learn about. So it could be, we're looking for mobile visitors who've purchased on our site before, and we want to get their experience and get their feedback on how that's gone. It could be that we're moving into an adjacent product line and we want to talk to people who've purchased similar products, but from a competitor. And so we can understand the more discovery type information from that audience. So I think it just typical consulting answer, it depends. Yes. And it should depend, because you don't want to just be always asking the same people or, kind of blindly talking to a specific audience over and over. You do want to kind of test the waters, but you don't want to leave your core customers behind either.
Yeah, so it is a bit of a challenge to be able to make sure you're keeping the plate spinning, is a phrase we use over here, to make sure that you don't drop any of those. So being able to find out who your customers are, you then need to align CRO on top of that. Are there any metrics used for being able to understand who your customers are and what behavior they're doing? Mm-hmm. Or is it something that you just let it flow and you have a whole toolbox full of different metrics that come into play at different times?
There are some typical customer journeys by industry. So we could have some predictability for what kind of metrics we would want to do for those types of use cases. And certainly we could talk about that. But I think a more holistic approach would be if you can borrow from the product world and say, here's my hypothesis for who my user is. Here are their problems and their goals, and then breaking those down into specific tasks, and then mapping out those tasks into a customer journey. And so as you mature through that life cycle of developing your website or your experience as its own product or as its own experience, you get to a place where you do have a more expected path that the customers will follow. And at each point in that path, there will be a page to see or a CTA to click on. And so those become the customer journey metrics that we keep track of. So we can understand, where people enter into the site, how they generally move about the site when they're browsing or learning, and then what they do when they ultimately find the product or find the service or the solution to then submit or purchase or share their email.
That's a good answer, because you use the word empathy there, and I've got a question here that I was going to ask anyway, but it says you run a series of webinars, Growth Through Empathy. Now, I think there's a very subtle difference between empathy and understanding. I feel that lots and lots of brands try to understand their customers, but very few brands have empathy with their customers. Do you see a difference, and how do you get empathy into your brand's awareness?
Yeah, to me, the distinction between empathy and understanding is you can understand someone, or you can understand someone's, maybe their motives or how they make decisions. But empathy requires, seeing things from being in their shoes, or I love to think of like putting the hat on of that person. And so trying to understand what their environment is like, or what might be going on, to give them the benefit of the doubt, I think is a really important part of that versus understanding. Empathy to me is the ability to remove yourself from the understanding and really focus on what's motivating the customer. What struggles do they have, both with your product and your experience, but even more broadly, like why are they even on your site in the first place? Something I see really often on new companies we work with is not being able to directly state from a customer perspective the message that they're looking for, right? So you may sell really great planners, and the customer knows they're looking for a planner, and that's great. But a better way to show empathy and to recognize their situation is to recognize the chaos that's their world, or what their desires are. They're looking for something concrete and focused and tangible in this world that's very transient and chaotic. And so kind of starting to move into a place where you can understand what makes somebody tick, what struggles they have, gives you just a deeper layer of empathy, of understanding of those people, and how you can connect with them and create meaning through the products and services that you sell. Because I think as soon as you can unlock that, and exactly what the problem is you're solving and who has that problem, you can go so much further as a business, but you're also having a real impact for that audience and for that group. And then other people can just leave it behind, right? You're empathetic for people who can't be your customer because you're so direct in saying, this is my customer, this is their problem. And if you don't have it, you're saving that other person time in researching and figuring out if their problem can be solved with this particular solution.
But do you think empathy is directly opposed to data? Because one's a very hard science and the other one's a very soft science.
I think that's exactly our intersection, is being able to bridge that, because in so many organizations, it's a separate practice of being empathetic versus understanding the data. But if you can apply a lens of empathy to data, or if you can bring data to your understanding of your customers' pain points, you're just getting stronger and stronger signal and understanding of what's happening for your customer and what their behaviors are. For example, if you saw a lot of drop off on a certain page, if you bring a more empathetic lens to it, you may ask, like, what struggle is that customer having? Like, why are they leaving? What is our miss here? Versus like, we need to decrease bounce rate and increase clicks here. And so it just kind of shortcuts your ability to make a solution to it, because you're not seeing from the customer's lens why those things may be happening in the data.
Do you believe that CRO can demonstrate empathy?
I think really good CRO must include empathy. I think there's not a way to do. I think all business needs to include empathy. If I'm being honest, we build relationships. Like, humankind is all about building connection and growing relationships and being a community. and businesses function as part of that. So if we're doing business without understanding or empathy or curiosity about our customers, it's not going to be a long-lasting business. So, to hyper focus then on CRO, we can't be the front line of the company in, that moment of people considering they're visiting the site and figuring out if they want to be a customer. We can't lack empathy in that moment, or we'll miss a lot of opportunity.
It's a great thought process that my late wife was a psychologist, and she used a phrase reasonably often. This is what you've said. This is what I've heard. And that, to me, sums up quite a lot of the mistakes that websites are doing, is that they're saying things, but people aren't hearing what they're saying. They're hearing something different to what's being said, because it may be the tone of voice, it may be a lack of empathy, it may be that they're the wrong part of the website or whatever. But I think your mix between empathy and data is an absolutely spot on way of being able to move forward with CRO, because it's, whilst the ROI is very deliverable and very hard focused and very much at the seat of the board, if you like, to be able to justify CRO, I think there is a lot more that empathy can show companies to understand what they're trying to be able to do, rather than telling them, but story tell them more, as it was a phrase that was used a couple of years ago, to be able to use stories to be able to get people to understand what the company believes in, rather than just the product. So it's an interesting topic, and I'd love to be able to pick this up at some point later in the time, because I think it's a subject all on its own, and I'd love to talk with you off the air with regard to this as well, because I think it's very interesting. But AJ, we're running close to our 30-minute time slot on this, and it's been a really fascinating conversation thus far. And as I said, I'd like to pick up on this again at some later stage, whether that's on or offline. But I think CRO has still got a lot to learn. CRO protagonists have still got a lot to learn, and I think your methodology seems to be one of the better methodologies that I've heard for many months. And I think it's very interesting that people will start to dive a little bit deeper than just a return on investment. So thank you very much for your time so far. As I said, it's been a great conversation, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed this as well.
Oh, that's good.